Well, good morning, everybody. We got a beautiful day here in Alabama opening up. Temperatures in the 80s, bright and sunny. Cleomes are starting to bloom. My pomegranate is starting to bloom. That makes me very, very happy. Potatoes are thick and lush. That's a rubber snake. Don't everybody freak out over that. That helps to keep the chipmunks and the squirrels out of the beds. It does a really good job. They kind of stay out in the middle of the yard now and around the trees and kind of avoid my beds and stuff with the little rubber snakes around them. And so that seemed to really make a difference. I sure got the attention of some of the people on my channel though. We got a bright, bright sunny day coming. Amarella's still blooming. Potatoes are getting thick. Still blooming a little bit. Try to move everybody slowly here. Just a quick walk around, then I'll show you what I'm up to. Onions are doing great. Still have a few left in the bed I need to pull out, but they are doing great. Finishing up. Started harvesting them. Give you an idea of the size and everything. This is a Texas Super Sweet, number 1015. Really good size. They store real well. They're delicious. They're sweet, and couldn't ask for a better harvest than that. Really, really good. And a handful more left. Lots of lilies blooming. Beautiful color. I'm trying to hold still for everybody, not move too fast. The sun's already out. Things are starting to wilt a little bit in the heat. Garlic. More potatoes. Another rubber snake. Peppers and tomatoes are doing great. Hostas are doing great. Everything's doing wonderful. Let me show you what I've been up to for the past week or so. A couple of years ago when I had my channel growing strong and had 200 plus orchids, I built one of these shade houses. And I just finished this one up. It's my second time having to build one of these. I gave the other one away. Got rid of it when I got rid of my orchids last time, and I missed it. There's no better way to protect your orchids outside and to keep them outside and keep them safe. This filters the light as it passes over them, keeps them from burning, but it gets them nice, bright filtered light, and the plants just seem to love it. It's on wheels. It's about 6.5 feet tall, about 6 feet wide, about 30 inches deep, and rolls around very easily. And I'll show you more of it again later. There's a couple of videos I've had out before with it on there. And we'll look at orchids again later too. But just to give you a little quick peek. Lots of new growths. A couple of flower spikes are actually coming out on a couple, so I'm really, really happy about that. But I'll start taking plants out and showing them individually and showing them the big new growth on them. Look at these growths that I've got coming. But they're all really doing great. A couple of little mounts I've put together that are doing wonderful. This is going to make for a beautiful mount, I believe. This is Brassavola nodosus, little stars. Lots of new growths on it. You can see the new shoots coming up. There's another one in the back here. Another one down over here on the front. This one's the same way, has several new shoots coming up, another one back here. Lots of new roots coming out. Seems to be very happy on that mount. I think that's going to make for a really, really good mount. Couldn't be happier. And again, we'll look at orchids again. I've kind of got an agenda today, so they've only been outside for a few days. They're enjoying the sun and the warmth. And I expect to really start seeing some hard growing here coming out really soon. So couldn't be happier. Orchid cactus I picked up. I'll show you again later. This is, if I'm saying it right, epiphyllum hookeri. And really happy to have that. Some of the hanging baskets. and some of my mounts just waiting for plants. This is going to be a gorgeous mount. I got to find special plants for that one. That's another beautiful, beautiful mount. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Nice hollow one. There's another one that's hollow. Everything looks good. That one's doing great in that mount. Got roots growing like crazy, and it's got another new spike coming out. So couldn't be happy with all the growth and everything. All right, let me walk you over here slowly and show you what I'm up to. And I'm not showing you all this to confuse people or get people worried or, oh my God, the mad chemist is at it again. No, it's just to prove a point. Let me put you on the tripod and we'll chat for a minute. I love talking about nutrients. There we go, that's better. The only reason I'm showing this is to prove a point, and that is that there's multiple, many ways to feed your orchids. And everybody does it differently. Not all of these I use on orchids, but I'm just going to show you what I kind of do, what works for me. And again, the best recommendation I can make for picking nutrients out is pick a nutrient and stick with it for a while. I see a lot of people where they buy a nutrient and they change a couple weeks later and then change again and change again. They keep jumping on the whatever seems to be popular at the moment kind of method, and I think that's going to confuse you and not give you good results. Pick a fertilizer and stay with it for a while until you decide it's not working for you or that it is working for you. Most fertilizers will work just fine on them. It's knowing how to use them and knowing what's in your mix, I think, is more important than the type of almost that you're using. You can make decisions for yourself as long as you're well informed, and I would rather just inform people and let you make the decisions. Now, I've got my Jack's calcium nitrate, my 51226. This is CalMag. This is Flora Micros. Micros, I think, is essential. Lots of micronutrients. Then I've got Flora Grow 216, and I've got Flora Bloom, which is a blooming type fertilizer, and my spray bottle in the back. And then, of course, the liquid seaweed. Now, that bloom fertilizer right there, the only reason that's there is to, again, prove a point. I don't use bloom fertilizers on my orchids whatsoever. I never use a bloom fertilizer on my orchids, ever. They bloom profusely, they do great, but I don't use bloom fertilizers. And the main reason is because of the additional phosphorus that's in those mixes. The Jack's 51226 kind of falls into that category as well. Hang on. Again, these are just my takes on things. I do a lot of research. I love to read research papers. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Wong. He's the director of horticulture at Texas A&M. He has a ton of research papers out. If you type in his name, Dr. Wong, W-A-N-G, Texas A&M, type in research papers or research orchids, you will come up with so many research papers. Some of them are a little bit difficult to read if you're not used to it, but most of them are very self-explanatory. It shows their methods and how they do it and what they're trying to find out, and then what the end results are. And I've learned so much from this gentleman and from how he grows orchids. And he was even talking about one of his videos about back in the early 90s, around 90, 91, that he went to Thailand and was visiting a couple of orchid farms and realized at that moment that there was a huge opportunity here for information that was needed, and that's why they started doing a lot of their research to help the commercial orchid growers develop their product for the market. And his methods and means and research applies to how we grow in our own grow rooms and basements and tents and greenhouses, etc. Our own collections, small collections, windowsills, dining room tables, kitchens, whatever. A lot of that stuff can apply to us and help us and answer a lot of questions. Orchids, and I'm going to talk about this bloom fertilizer. Orchids don't have a natural ability to self-regulate, I guess, phosphorus intake. They're not exposed to vast amounts of phosphorus in the wild, in nature, and so they've never really developed what I consider a good self-regulation for that nutrient. And so when they're exposed to a lot of phosphorus, like in bloom mixes, etc., or like in this Jack's 51226. And I do use the Jack 51226, just not as often as I used to. I still use the calcium nitrate all the time, and I do use the 51226, but not quite as often. When they're exposed to a lot of phosphorus, they can uptake toxic amounts of it, and phosphorus can block calcium absorption when they get too much into their system. And calcium is super, super important, more important than phosphorus for sure. And the orchids have to have lots of calcium, so I'm very cautious about using too much. And if you look at some of the other leading fertilizers, like MSU is a great example, their phosphorus number is very, very low. Now the Flora Grow, the 2:1:6, that's a better ratio of phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen. That one works really, really good by itself. You can use that just by itself and grow beautiful orchids. The micros, in my opinion, is super essential. That is 501. It's mainly a little bit of calcium nitrate with a little bit of potassium, 0 phosphorus, but it is packed, and I mean packed full of macro and micronutrients, all the nutrients that orchids need and other plants need. And again, I have a little bit of experience growing in hydroponics, and so I kind of like the liquid nutrients as well. Now the granular nutrients like the Jack's calcium nitrate and the 51226 are super easy to work, and they mix in water and basically become the same stuff up here. So there's nothing wrong with either one of those. But again, I'm just trying to inform so you can make decisions yourselves. Now, the CalMag is 100. It's got a tiny little bit of nitrogen in it, but it's mainly calcium and with magnesium. The calcium is a calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is not easily absorbed by plants. It has to have some microbial activity or something to break that molecular bond. When we drink tap water, which has calcium carbonate in it, our stomach acid breaks down that molecular bond, and allows us to absorb that calcium. In the case of the CalMag, they take that calcium carbonate and they attach it to another molecule. Typically it's a metal molecule like aluminum or iron, and it's iron in this particular case with the CalMag. I believe that's called chelated. It's chelated to iron. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But when they do that, the molecular bond is broken and the calcium is now in an absorbable form, very easily absorbed by plants. That's what makes that CalMag such a great product. This is CalMagic. There's CalMag, CalMagic. It's all kind of the same stuff. But orchids love it. You can never give them too much calcium. Anyway, if I'm feeding, just to answer some questions, if I'm feeding calcium nitrate, I do not add CalMag. If I'm using the other nutrients, I will add CalMag. But if I'm using calcium nitrate, which has 15% nitrogen and 17% calcium, I don't need to add the CalMag. Hope it makes sense. Now, the only time, and this is one of the questions I get when people ask me how much calcium do you give them, just to put it in perspective, the only time my plants get water that doesn't have calcium in it is when they get rained on. Now they're outside in the orchid shade house now, and they're going to get rained on a regular basis, and that's going to help with my flushing, move nutrients around, allow them to feed better, but mainly to flush them. That's the only time they get water where it doesn't have calcium in it. If I'm flushing myself or spraying with just straight water with no nutrients, I'm going to add a little bit of CalMag to it. Probably about anywhere from 25 to 40 parts per million. That seems to be more than enough, because they always have calcium around them, so I don't need to give them a high dose of calcium because I always keep calcium around them. Now, I hope that answers a little bit of the questions. One of the other questions I get asked all the time is, how often do I have to water in stone and lava rock and in that inert media that I use? And that's a great question. Probably every fourth, fifth question that I get asked is, how often do I have to water? And I repeat it, and I don't mind repeating it. I'm sure it confuses a lot of people because I'm growing in lava rock or stone. And there's nothing wrong with moss and bark. There are wonderful medias for growing orchids, and I think everybody should grow in what they're comfortable with, what they feel confident in, and what works best for them and their environment. Now, I'm in mid-Alabama. I'm about halfway down in the state of Alabama, just south of Birmingham. We get very warm summertime here. In the wintertime, we do get a frost occasionally. We do get some cold weather. But our environment is a little bit on the warmer side, just to put things in perspective. Moss and bark would work great here, but because of my background and I have a little bit of experience growing in hydroponics, I prefer inert medias, mainly because it gives me a lot of control. I can really control how they feed, when they feed, and how often they feed. If you're in moss and bark, and I'm just using as an example, I'm not starting arguments here or fighting with anybody. If you're in, let's say you're in sphagnum moss or in bark, and you saturate that pot, it may not dry out for 10 days to 2 weeks. So you're not going to be able to feed your orchids but once, twice a month. When I feed, and my preferred method is to take a container with nutrient mix mixed into it and take my pots, multiple pots, set them down in there and let them sit and soak for 15 to 20 minutes. Letting them sit and soak for 15-20 minutes, the roots have absorbed as much moisture as they can absorb. The plants are well hydrated. They've absorbed a lot of nutrients. The pot has absorbed water. The stone has absorbed water. The lava rock has absorbed water. Everything is saturated, and it stays damp for several days. The reason I know that is moving my orchid house around years ago when I first was growing orchids. I knocked a few plants over moving the orchid house around, and even though I hadn't watered for several days, the pot would knock over, the lava rock or gravel would spill out, and I noticed that the plant roots are still damp and green. The lava rock, the stone was still damp deep down inside the pot, and the pot still had moisture deep down inside. So I know they stay dry or stay damp for 2 or 3 days easily. Then if you add on a dry cycle of 2 or 3 days, you're only feeding once a week. Now I can feed more often than that because there's lots and lots of airflow in my media versus moss and bark. And I'm not putting those medias down. I'm just explaining things and why I grow in what I grow in. I'm not growing in moss and rock to make it harder on myself or to just be the odd one out there. A lot of people grow in leca and things of that nature too, pumice, etc. And those are all great medias, and so is moss and bark. When I'm growing in moss, or when I'm growing in my media, the inert media, and I'm able to feed every 5 days over a 30-day period, I can feed around 6 times versus moss and bark maybe twice. So I can feed 3, even 4 times as much. And I'm not talking about quantities or large amounts of nutrients. I'm talking about little tiny amounts, more often. I always tell people, go back to Mother Nature, go back to orchids growing in the wild, and if you can kind of mimic that, copy that, act more like grow your orchids more like what Mother Nature would, or how they would grow in the wild, you'll have more success. Every time an orchid would get rained on in the wild, hanging on a tree, they're going to get nutrients. They're going to get a little bit of nutrients every single time. The only time I do spray or flush my orchids, but now that they're outside, the rain's going to kind of do that for me. But the only time I don't give calcium to my orchids is when they get rained on. If I'm using a nutrient mix, it has calcium in it, whether it's CalMag or whether it's the calcium nitrate. But if I'm using just plain water to flush them, I'm going to have some type of CalMag mixed in with it. Anyway, I hope that explains that. And I hope that explains why I feed in what I'm feeding, or why I grow in what I grow. I like it because I have a lot of control over it, and because I can feed them a little more often. And the plants seem to really thrive with that. They really do, especially if you have, like right now where it's warm outside and I've got new canes and new shoots and new bulbs and new roots just pouring out of these plants, and to give them food on a regular basis every few days, they really seem to respond and grow. I want my new shoots and my new canes and my new flower spikes and new bulbs and my roots to grow to their maximum potential. If I can only feed them once or twice a month, I'm not able to keep those new shoots and new growth getting them as big as I would like to get them, growing them to their maximum potential, if that makes sense. Excuse me. I also have kelp and seaweed here, one of my favorite products. It's a great supplement, and I like to mix that to my mixes also. It doesn't add a lot of parts per million when you're mixing up your mix, but it does provide a lot of hormones and a good bit of potassium. That's mainly what's in it, 001. It's mainly potassium with a lot of hormones. Some of the kelp and seaweed, and I've mentioned this before, that the kelp and seaweed mixes supplements are made from, some of those kelp and seaweed strains grow several feet per day, so they have they're really big, really strong growth hormones mixed in with those, and the orchids seem to really respond to them. They really do. Now, when I'm mixing up my nutrients, I might feed anywhere from 25, 30 parts per million on some days to 50 parts per million on other days to 100 to 150 to 175 and even bump 200 occasionally. And I have fed more than 200 parts per million. I don't think there's anything wrong with feeding a variety. I prefer to feed a variety of strengths to my mix and allow the plants to pick and choose different nutrients. I think it's super important for people to not get hung up on trying to hit those numbers every single time. If you feed a little bit strong one time, it's not going to hurt. If you feed a little bit lower amounts, it's not going to hurt. Let it swing both ways. The more nutrients that are in a mix, the lower the pH is going to be. The less nutrients that are in a mix, the higher the pH is going to be. Allowing that pH to swing from up and down is going to expose those plants and those roots and to different nutrients at different pH levels. Different nutrients are absorbed at different pH levels, and by allowing your pH to swing like that, you're going to give them a more varied diet. You're going to allow them to feed a little bit more like they would in nature, in the wild. So don't get quite so hung up on the amounts and everything. If you mix up your mix a little bit strong when you mix it up sometime, just add a little bit more water to it and dilute it down. Won't hurt it a bit. And if it's not quite as high, don't worry about it. Feed it at a lower dose occasionally. It won't hurt either. It's more about learning to use your mix, being confident with your mix and comfortable with your mix. I think that's more important than anything. And again, don't jump from one nutrient mix to the other. Pick a nutrient mix and stick with it, whether it's JAX or General Hydroponics or MSU or the Better Grow fertilizers. They all work real well. It's knowing how to use them, I think, is more important. So I like calcium nitrate over ammoniacal or over urea. Ureas and ammonicals have to have a little bit higher temperature range in order for those to be more easily absorbed and to work better. Calcium nitrate has been shown to absorb actually better when it has a little bit of ammoniacal mixed in with it, so nitrogen mixed in with it. And when you look at some of the nutrient mixes, you look at the labels on the back, they usually have a little bit of ammoniacal mixed in with the nitrate. And I think research has shown that calcium nitrate is absorbed better when it has a little bit of ammoniacal along with it. Why? I'm not sure. It doesn't really explain it in the research. So anyway, I hope I've explained a little bit about my soaking method and why I use inert medias, because I can feed more often and I have more control, and how often I have to water. It's not quite as crazy as I think some people believe. I'm going to have to water every single day. It's not like that. It's not like that at all. The secret to using inert medias is letting them sit and soak. And I prefer the clay pots. A lot of people say they can't grow in clay pots. They have problems with the roots touching the clay pot. If you're not flushing your plants and you let that pot absorb a lot of nutrients and you don't flush very often, it's going to hold on to those nutrients, that salt buildup on the surface, and that's going to it's going to cause those roots to die back when they touch that pot. So flush your plants like you're supposed to. If I'm not getting rained on, and now I'm outside, they're getting rained on, but when I was inside growing over the past several months, I would feed 3 or 4 times, and then they would get a good soak in just fresh water, or I'd pour just water through them and make sure they were good and flushed. That's how I do it. Keeps my pots from building up a lot of salt residue on them or any kind of residue on them. It moves nutrients back around in the pot that are just sitting there. Remember, if these are the orchid roots right here, they can only absorb what's actually on the roots themselves. They don't have the ability like plants in soil to use water or moisture and capillary action to absorb and pull nutrients to them. They can only absorb what's actually on their roots. So when it rains, those nutrients that are in that pot get washed back onto those roots again, and they can start feeding again. That's usually why anytime you get and I've mentioned this before, anytime there's a rain or I hit them with just straight water, I usually see a big growth right after the rain or right after I just flush my plant pots. And the main reason is because you moved existing nutrients around back into that pot and pushed them or flowed them over to the roots or onto the roots, adjacent to the roots, so they can absorb them again. I hope that makes sense. So when I'm feeding liquid nutrients, I like to use a pipette. You can suck that out very quickly by squeezing the bulb, and you can add drop very, very accurately and adjust your mixes that way. When I'm feeding granular types like 5-12-26 or calcium nitrate or Better Grow, I prefer to use my fingers and pick up a pinch I don't like to use teaspoons or scoops or anything like that. I prefer to use my fingers and a pinch like that. That way I can raise it up slowly, measure it with my meter. TDS meters are confusing to some people, intimidating to some people. They're very simple. They measure the total dissolved solids that's in your mix, and they help you have a better understanding of what you're actually looking at and what you're dealing with, how much nutrients is actually mixed up in your liquid. So once you do it several times, and I don't even check my pH anymore, because I know my rainwater comes off my roof around 7.1, sometimes 6.8. And I know when I add nutrients to it, it drops it down into around 6 range, 5.8 being a special spot. So I know it drops it down where they can absorb all these different types of nutrients. It puts it down in the perfect range for them to be able to absorb. Knowing what you're starting with, you don't have to check it all the time. I don't really check my pH anymore because I know what my rain is coming off the roof. I know what my mixes do it, and I've done this so many times, literally hundreds and hundreds of times. I can mix it up, check it with my TDS meter, so I know how strong my mix is, and I don't worry about the pH. I just go ahead and feed my orchids, and they respond. So don't get so hung up on it. Don't get so concerned about the pH. Don't get so concerned about parts per million and using TDS meters. They're tools that are there to help it make it easier and take your growing to the next level, give you more control. A lot of beginners don't have control. They use teaspoons. The back of the package will say use a teaspoon per gallon. Wow, that puts it up into 800 parts per million range, or even 1,000 plus parts per million range. Way too high for orchids, in my opinion. Orchids would never get that in the wild, on a tree, in nature. They would never get high amounts like that. Again, excuse me, just my take on things. So if you don't have a pipette, you can usually get these from a pharmacist for free, or you can buy them online. They're very, very inexpensive. You can use a syringe, without the needle on it. Works great. And you can also just take a plastic drinking straw, like out of a soda, and you can put your finger over the end of it, or put it down in the liquid, put your finger on the end, raise it up, and just drop, 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 drop. That's another great way to measure out your nutrients in a liquid without using a spoon, teaspoon, tablespoon kind of measurements. Manufacturers want you to use their product up very, very quickly, so you'll go buy more. That's what they're more interested in. I'm just explaining. Anyway, kelp and seaweed, great supplement. I always put some of that in my mix. It doesn't really give you a lot of PM parts per million marks. You don't see a lot of difference in your parts per million when you add that, and that's okay. Don't worry about it. I use maybe a teaspoon of that when I'm mixing up a container like I have over here next to me. It's a lot of potassium and a lot of growth hormones. And like I've said before, those growth hormones on some of that seaweed, some of those plants can grow 2 and 3 feet in a day. So very, very strong growth hormones, and the plants really respond and really, really like it. So I've explained about the bloom fertilizers. I don't like to use those because I don't have control in absorption of their phosphorus. So I don't like to use bloom fertilizers. That Micros is packed full of micro and macronutrients. To me, that's a real essential one. Now, I can get the same macro and micronutrients using the 5-12-26, and I do still use the 5-12-26 like I've explained before, but not as often because of the phosphorus content. So I use it every once in a while, but not quite as often. I prefer to use the calcium nitrate, some Micros, maybe the FloraGrow. I don't use calcium nitrate and CalMag at the same time. No reason to. It's just duplication of I don't need to do that. So if I'm just using the liquid supplements, I'll have CalMag. If I'm just using flushing water with no nutrients at all, it's going to get CalMag. And like I said before, the only time they get water that doesn't have calcium in it is when they get rained on. So I hope I've explained some of that today and not been too repetitive. I do that all the time. Thank you everybody for all the kind words and the thoughts, the comments, the prayers, the questions. I love those questions. I try to answer every question. I try and answer every comment on my channel. I can't thank you all enough. Please go visit those other orchid channels and show your love and support. We have a great orchid community, and I think the more we support the channels, the better it is. I know that Nina at Ninja Orchids is going to have a live show tomorrow on Friday, the May 17th, I think around 8:30 p.m. I'm going to try and be on there and say hello to her. I consider her a great grower. She does fantastic editing. She has beautiful plans. She puts out a wealth of information. I love the way she grows. I love the way she explains things, and she truly likes to help people and put out a lot of good information. And you know, I'm not doing this for a living. I don't think she does that for a living either. I think she does it just because she really loves to help people grow orchids, and she really loves growing orchids. So go show her your support. Give her a thumbs up. Tell her Rick sent you, and maybe I'll see you on the live feed. So have a great day, everybody. A great evening, and go feed your orchids, and keep asking those great questions. We'll talk soon.